An Autobiography of Our Galaxy, the Milky Way by Moya McTeer. She graduated from Harvard as the first person in school history to double major in astrophysics and folklore mythology, and became the first black woman to graduate from Columbia's astronomy PhD program. And this is her book, published in, I believe, 2022, An Autobiography of Our Galaxy, the Milky Way. I'm not exactly sure how I came across this book, but seeing that this book was written in that autobiography type of style, and I knew I had to give it a try. And when I finally got my hands on it and I started reading it, I was pleasantly surprised of how enjoyable reading it is, especially of our topic, the galaxy. Now, this book is an autobiography of the Milky Way. The book is written as a self account of the Milky Way's life, as if the galaxy were a person speaking about its own existence, is being told in that first person point of view. Now, usually autobiographies sometimes begin with the earliest part of that narrator's history or existence, and then kind of generally follows like the events of his life in like the chronological order. But this book begins by addressing the many misconceptions, myths, and the stories surrounding the Milky Way. And throughout like the opening chapter of the book, the Milky Way challenges the ideas of like philosophers or astronomers and humans as well, proving them many of them wrong, and letting us humans know that our ancestors may have understood us or felt more connected to the galaxies than many people do today. And the first chapter sets the record straight of the Milky Way, revealing the countless stories connected to the existence, emphasizing the Milky Way as like the creator of the stars, planets, and life as we know it today. And the Milky Way is talking in this humor and playful tease for those who misunderstand things. The narrator is delivered in a humorous tone, with the Milky Way frequently addressing and commenting on humans throughout the book, like throughout all of the book. Going on to chapter two, My Name. The Milky Way explores many of the different names cultures gave it around the world, had given it throughout the history. No matter where people lived on Earth, almost every culture created its own stories, meanings of our galaxy. And one of the chapter's main idea is that these cultural names and interpretations are important and should not be erased or replaced, because they reflect the unique ways humans have connected with our galaxy and our solar system. So that was a really good chapter. In the chapter four, Creation, discusses the different mythological creation stories from cultures around the world, highlights the similarities between them. And you know, many of these stories begin with that deep primordial ocean, or some form of chaos before creation takes shape. The chapter explores early humans' perspective on how the universe began, showing how these beliefs often depended on where people lived and that the cultures they belong to. For example, she touches on Norse mythology, more specifically the Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda, and exploring their stories about the creation of life and the universe. And as well as like the Hindu religion, talks about the god Brahma and the Hindu ideas of the cosmos and creation. So really good chapter, really good chapter. In chapter 5, The Hometown, the longest chapter of the book, explores the Milky Way, talking about its hometown, but not the way that humans will talk about their hometown. And that is important to know, that the Milky Way hometown and the neighboring surrounding it, the neighbors surrounding it. This chapter examines the neighboring galaxies surrounding it, some large, some small, and describing their place within the local galactic neighborhood. And these galaxies aren't just chilling there, they're constantly moving and evolving. But the one thing that stuck out to me the most was the research that they're going after. It's this intergalactic gas, and they use it by the force of gravity. And this intergalactic gas is like a cosmic fuel for their growth. And this chapter also dwells into the history of like the early astronomers and scientists, and how they also found these galaxies and the methods that they use to try to calculate the size, distance of the galaxy. So that's a really good chapter. Chapter 7, Modern Myths. Let me start off with a quote here. Humans make new myths every day about things they want to have faith in, like politicians that keep their promises, or the idea of that altruistic billionaire. This chapter argues that that people often create stories they want to believe in because these stories make the universe feel more magical, mysterious, or exciting. And she comments on like popular science fiction such as like the Star Wars and Star Trek, and how these modern audience sometimes focus more of these fictional portrayals than our older cultural stories and myths about the galaxy. Really good chapter, really good chapter. Chapter 10, the afterlife. So ancient civilization had their own stories about what happens after death. This chapter explains how many of these afterlife myths were surprisingly similar, often including strict rules, judgments, or requirements the people had to follow. In ancient times, life was incredibly difficult. People faced famines, wars, volcanoes, eruptions, floods, harsh winters, depending on the region. And having an idea of an afterlife gave people something to look forward to, help them keep moving forward, I should say. Across different cultures, a lot of these afterlife stories shared a common purpose that possibly cause fear of the eternal punishment to the masses, or maybe to encourage good behavior by warning people of possible punishment after death, or possible, or also the using it for political authority. Really a good chapter. Another good chapter. Chapter 14, Doomsday. Now, when it comes to ancient civilization myth stories, not only some of their stories about creations, but a lot of the stories tells how the universe end, and pretty much having their own apocalypse myth story, and found common throughout majority of the ancient civilization doomsday stories is that they always start with some type of violence or corruption among the humans, and that these doomsday stories myths are about like the consequence of like human behavior as a whole. Now, when the Milky Way describes its doomsday, it is very direct about it. It explains that the ancient human myths don't come close to the humanity's true end might look like. And in this chapter, it describes how the Milky Way will eventually collide with another galaxy called Andromeda. This collision would be so intense for our solar system that no human could survive it. Really good chapter. Now, my final thoughts. So, this book is just about 250 pages with some really good illustrations. Before reading this book, I didn't have a strong understanding of the Milky Way, but after reading this book, I now have a solid understanding of our galaxy. From what the Milky Way may look like if we were to view it from like the outside. This book describes the Milky Way in a clear, vivid way, to the shape, to the size, to the spiraling arms. But what I like most interesting in the book before reading this book was to learn about the use of gravity force, which is explained well in this book, goes in depth about the black hole in the middle that no light can pass through, and talks about the mysterious dark matter, which was a very interesting chapter. So I got this book in like 2023. The writing style, it uses that autobiography format combined with that creative humor, made it very easy and enjoyable to read. I can say that. It makes science accessible, especially for people who might think science is boring or irrelevant. And also, there's some good quotes in this book. The one that struck me out the most, it was like, many of you don't realize this, but myths were some of you species' first attempt at scientific inquiry. Our early ancestors observed these natural phenomena, these thunderstorms, floods, volcano eruptions, meteor showers, and even you can consider the sun's daily movement. And they possibly created stories around these events to make them make sense. Myths were an early way of humans trying to understand the world around them, and I believe this author does great blending the storytelling, mythology, and science in this book, offering a perspective that is very truly unique among these other science books, and that is a really good read. Now, if you have read this book, please let me know in the comments what you think about it, or if you plan on reading it. If you enjoyed this content, hit the like button and subscribe. Till next time.